President Trump tells allies to pay their fair share, pay what they owe from years past, and to start fighting terrorism in earnest while dealing with international outrage over intelligence leaks. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. The man known for the art of the deal tried to seal the deal with NATO allies today, creating some awkward moments at the opening of the new NATO headquarters. President Trump wants them to pay what they promised, to provide for their defense and to stop over-relying on the American taxpayer. Meanwhile, the president got an earful from Britain's prime minister about information leaks she considers extremely serious, and then he took action. Correspondent Kevin Cork starts us off tonight from NATO headquarters in Brussels. Good evening, Kevin.
Hey there, Bret. Good evening to you. The president is asking the Justice Department to look into that leak by U.S. intelligence officials, apparently to the New York Times. And that actually drew something that I think people would find fairly unprecedented. The Brits are now, at least temporarily, refusing to share information with U.S. intelligence officials as it relates specifically to that devastating terror attack that took place in Manchester. And this is just the latest fallout that actually threatened to overshadow the president's first visit to the NATO summit. They may have been all smiles during the family photo at the NATO summit in Brussels this afternoon, but the seemingly sunny disposition of the leaders appeared to mask clouds of discord within the ranks, especially after U.S. intelligence agencies were accused of leaking information about the terror attack in Manchester to the U.S. media.
I will be making clear to President Trump today that intelligence that is shared between law enforcement agencies must remain secure.
British Prime Minister Theresa May's frustration was the result of disclosures by the New York Times that not only named the alleged terrorist in the Manchester attack, it included details previously known only to British and U.S. intelligence officials, calling into question the safety of information sharing between the longtime allies. For his part, President Trump promised action, saying in a statement, "The alleged leaks coming out of government agencies are deeply troubling. These leaks have been going on for a long time, and my administration will get to the bottom of this." The intelligence dispute comes on a day when another brewing controversy threatened to dampen the opening of NATO's new state-of-the-art headquarters here, with President Trump using his first NATO summit to insist that America's European partners pay up.
Yes. These grave security concerns are the same reason that I have been very, very direct with Secretary Stoltenberg and members of the alliance in saying that NATO members must finally contribute their fair share and meet their financial obligations.
NATO members are supposed to contribute 2% of GDP to fund the group's cooperative defense. But of the 28 countries in the alliance, only 5, the U.S., UK, Poland, Estonia, and Greece, currently meet that criteria.
This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States. And many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years and not paying in those past years.
France is close to NATO's 2% GDP goal, and today its newly elected president, Emmanuel Macron, had a working lunch with President Trump on the sidelines here at the summit, after which the men agreed to work together to strengthen the crucial alliance.
Thank you very much.
So after a little more than 30 hours on the ground here in Brussels, the president made his way back to Italy, this time to Sicily, for the G7 summit. And we believe that on the agenda, among the many items, will be economic cooperation, security coordination, and indeed climate change. Bret?
Kevin Cork traveling with the president in Brussels. Thank you. Meanwhile, the search for a new FBI director. Kevin, I'm going to bring you back here. I've got a question for you. The search for a new FBI director is continuing. We had reporting last night that Senator Lieberman had dropped out of the running. What's new with that?
Well, you're right about that. Senator Lieberman obviously very concerned about a possible conflict of interest, so he is out. Now we have learned that there are some other big names as the president continues to expand the net, if you will. I want to share a couple with you. Former senior director Richard McFeely is one big name that we're hearing. Another, that of former Oklahoma Governor Frank Keating. A lot of people certainly familiar with his name. We'll see if either one can make it all the way home with that job. Bret?
Okay, Kevin, thank you. We are getting new insight this evening about what may have motivated the Manchester suicide bomber as authorities continue to make arrests in what they call a complicated network supporting this attack. 22 people died and more than 100 were injured when the man blew himself up outside a packed concert venue. Senior correspondent Rick Leventhal is in Manchester tonight. Good evening, Rick.
Good evening, Bret. Some tense moments earlier this evening in the town of Wigan, about 40 minutes north of Manchester. Police serving a warrant on the home of a suspect believed connected to Monday night's terror attack had to call in the bomb disposal team and evacuate the neighborhood after suspicious items were found inside that house. The cordon has now been lifted. The neighbors were allowed back into their homes, but the search for suspects and evidence continues, and so does the healing of the survivors.
This is Millie. Hello.
A royal visit by 91-year-old Queen Elizabeth, spending time with some of the young victims of Monday night's terror attack.
I enjoyed the concert.
Dozens remain hospitalized, more than 20 in critical care, with blast injuries described by doctors as complex and challenging. Manchester police carrying out more raids, arresting at least 8 people so far, suggesting suicide bomber Salman Abedi did not act alone.
I want to reassure people that the arrests that we have made are significant, and initial searches of premises have revealed items that we believe are very important to the investigation. These searches will take several days to complete.
Abedi's older brother was arrested in Manchester Tuesday. Wednesday, his father and younger brother Hashim were taken into custody in Tripoli, Libya. Authorities there say Hashim confessed to knowledge of the plot and said both he and Salman belonged to ISIS. Investigators believe Salman spent 3 weeks in Libya before flying through Dusseldorf, Germany last Thursday on his way to the UK. Friday, he was spotted at a Manchester shopping center buying the bag believed to have been used to carry the bomb to the arena, where he blew himself up as fans were leaving the Ariana Grande concert, killing 22, including off-duty Cheshire police officer Elaine McIver, and injuring more than 100. A UK security source tells Sky News the bomb contained hydrogen peroxide and may not have been as sophisticated as first reported, suggesting it could have been assembled on a kitchen table. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, the bomber's sister says Salman was angry about U.S. airstrikes on Syria, saying he saw children dying and wanted revenge. Many of the victims here were children.
My dad ran over to me and picked me up, and then we tied jumpers and stuff around the 2 main wounds in my leg, and then he just picked me up, and then we just ran outside, and then a lot of the paramedics outside and just strangers were just helping us really.
Some of the victims will require reconstructive surgeries. Meanwhile, the memorial and signs of support here in St. Anne's Square. Earlier this afternoon, a group of paramedics came by to pay their respects, and the crowd applauded them. Bret.
Rick Leventhal live in Manchester. Rick, thank you. Back here in the U.S., another major setback today for President Trump's immigration travel ban. And tonight, news that the Justice Department is ready to fight all the way to the highest court in the land. Correspondent Doug McKelway is here with breaking details. Good evening, Doug.
Evening, Brad. In a 10-3 decision, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals today refused to reinstate President Trump's revised travel ban. The Trump administration now vowing to appeal to the Supreme Court in a fight over the limits of executive power. The appeals court apparently was swayed by comments that then candidate Trump made during the campaign calling for a Muslim ban. In the scathing opinion, the majority said the 90-day revised suspension of travel from 6 Mideast countries, quote, speaks with vague words of national security, but in context drips with religious intolerance, animus, and discrimination. In a dissent, Judge Dennis Shedd wrote, quote, the real losers in this case are the millions of individual Americans whose security is threatened on a daily basis by those who seek to do us harm. And late today, Attorney General Jeff Sessions echoed that dissent, writing, quote, the executive order is a constitutional exercise of the president's duty to protect our communities from terrorism. The president is not required to admit people from countries that sponsor or shelter terrorism until he determines that they can be vetted properly and do not pose a security risk to the United States. The administration had argued that its revised ban was much more limited than the original.
It is important to note that nothing in this executive order affects existing lawful permanent residents or persons with current authorization to enter our homeland. Unregulated, unvetted travel is not a universal privilege, especially when national security is at stake.
In addition, the revised ban also deleted all mention of religion. made case-by-case exceptions, omitted Iraq, where many citizens had been invaluable partners in the fight against terrorism, and eliminated the blanket ban on Syrian refugees. But civil libertarians argued the ban violated the Constitution's religious freedom clause.
The question here is whether just because he mentions national security, he's going to be allowed to basically rip up the religious freedom portions of our Constitution and throw them in the garbage. And the answer to that question has to be no.
In its appeal to the Supreme Court, the administration is certain to cite high court precedent from a 1950 decision that the president has sole authority to set immigration law. Bret?
Doug, thank you. When we say politics is a contact sport, we're usually using a metaphor. But last night, a Republican congressional candidate grabbed and threw down a reporter on the eve of today's special election. Correspondent Alicia Acuna and her crew had a ringside seat for this clash. She joins us now from Bozeman, Montana. Good evening, Alicia.
Hi, Bret. Yes, and campaign volunteers for Greg Gianforte continue to set up for the watch party here in Bozeman. Bret, we're still trying to confirm whether or not the candidate plans to be here tonight as he originally said he was going to. This, as his assault case, is now in the hands of the county attorney.
Sick and tired of you guys. The last time that came in here, you did the same thing. Get the hell out of here.
Greg Gianforte looked like a safe bet for Montana's lone House seat until he threw to the ground a reporter the night before polls opened in the state's special election.
You just body slammed me and broke my glasses.
Police charge Gianforte with misdemeanor assault, which carries a possible 6-month jail sentence. The question now, will it matter? In a rural state where nearly half the population votes early, 37% of absentee ballots had already been submitted.
You know, how you run your election is how you're going to run the office.
Gianforte is facing Rob Quist, a Bernie Sanders supporter and a popular local musician who lacks big money but has fired up liberals in a state that often votes Democratic.
Get the hell out of here.
Democrats capitalized on the last-minute campaign gift with a web ad saying Gianforte has no business being in Congress. The state's 3 biggest newspapers quickly retracted their endorsement of the Republican. And as Montanans voted, Gianforte stayed away from cameras, canceling a scheduled interview with Fox. On Capitol Hill, both Republicans and Democrats were quick to condemn the violence.
There's never a call for physical altercations.
Donald Trump's his model, and we've really got to say, come on, behave.
We need more people in D.C. to help my father.
In recent weeks, big-name surrogates like Donald Trump Jr. emphasized Gianforte's embrace of his father. Quist brought in Bernie Sanders. Both candidates ran on outsider platforms. But even before the incident, political watchers here told Fox Gianforte's style could be an issue.
I think the perception is that he's a little pricklier maybe than other candidates have been in the past.
Polls in Montana close at 10 p.m. Eastern, and we should have results soon after. Bret.
Alicia Acuna live in Montana. Alicia, thank you. We'll have results here on Fox News Channel. The Senate Intelligence Committee is giving its top 2 members blanket authority to issue subpoenas in the investigation into alleged Russian interference with last fall's election. Chairman Richard Burr and Vice Chair Mark Warner will be able to issue the subpoenas as they deem necessary. Now to a follow-up story on last night's explosive story about illegal surveillance conducted by the Obama administration on thousands of Americans. Illegal searches so egregious, the Obama administration received a harsh rebuke from the secretive FISA court. Here's Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen with reaction.
What does this mean?
House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi is a member of the Gang of Eight, the group of House and Senate leaders, plus chairs and ranking members of intelligence committees briefed on intelligence issues. Yet Pelosi confessed ignorance of this week's disclosure that the National Security Agency, for at least 5 years under the Obama administration, systematically violated Americans' Fourth Amendment rights.
I don't know what the particular, I have not been briefed on the particular case that they are referencing.
In declassified documents first obtained by the news outlet outlet Circa, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court scolded NSA for an institutional lack of candor and added sternly, this is a very serious Fourth Amendment issue. House Oversight Committee Chair Jason Chaffetz told Fox News the documents appear to show the Obama administration routinely abused the NSA's internet surveillance tools. We must get answers and hold people accountable. Fellow Utah Republican Chris Stewart sits on the Intelligence Committee.
Do you think someone should go to prison for this?
Well, if they violated it and they did it knowingly and they avoided or ignored processes and procedures to protect that privacy, then absolutely they should be held accountable.
The FISA court said the new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, enacted reforms that will, quote, largely resolve NSA's so-called compliance problems. Civil liberties groups said the disclosures should factor into lawmakers' decision at year's end about whether to reauthorize the NSA collection program that witnessed the abuses.
But I don't think that this is a problem that is going to be resolved with just an investigation by the Department of Justice. What we have are authorities that were broadly drafted that allow surveillance that is concerning.
The agencies are pushing for reauthorization of this authority, but they can't even identify the scope of the impact on U.S. persons that these programs have.
The sheer scale of the Fourth Amendment violations disclosed is staggering, as was the sternness of the rebuke to the Obama administration delivered by the FISA court, which ordinarily approves 99.9% of the government's requests for surveillance. As of a few minutes ago, however, Bret, this story had not been covered on the Washington Post, the New York Times, nor any of the 3 nightly news broadcasts on the 3 broadcast networks.
Pretty amazing. We will cover it with the panel. James, thank you. Former President Obama is defending his actions or inactions in Syria. He told an audience in Germany that not bombing Syria after President Bashar al-Assad crossed Mr. Obama's red line took political courage.
I look at a place like Syria, where despite our best efforts, and this is something Angela and I worked on a lot, you still have a vicious war taking place. You still have millions of people displaced, hundreds of thousands killed. As president, I did not always have the tools that I wanted to affect those kinds of changes, but at least we tried.
A few days ago, when Mr. Obama made a similar statement about not bombing Syria, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham replied, what President Obama calls political courage, most everyone else calls weakness and poor judgment. The Pentagon says more than 100 civilians were killed after the U.S. dropped a bomb on a building in Mosul, Iraq in March. An investigation found the device triggered secondary explosions from bombs clandestinely planted by Islamic State fighters in that building. It was likely the largest single incident of civilian deaths since the U.S. air campaign against ISIS began in 2014. China is protesting a U.S. Navy patrol that sent a warship near a group of artificial islands in the South China Sea. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin tells us tonight from the Pentagon, those islands are already the focus of intense disagreement.
For the first time since President Trump took office, an American guided missile destroyer sailed within 12 nautical miles of one of China's man-made islands in the South China Sea. Early Thursday, the USS Dewey passed near the aptly named Mischief Reef in the Spratly Chain, one of 3 islands built by China in the past 3 years containing a runway and military fortifications. Beijing strongly protested the U.S. action, deploying 2 Chinese warships as a warning, urging the U.S. destroyer to change course.
We urge the U.S. to correct its mistake immediately and stop provocative actions that hurt China's sovereignty and security interests.
The Pentagon would not confirm the USS Dewey's exact course, saying freedom of navigation operations, quote, are not about any one country, nor are they about making political statements. The Chinese have built a total of 7 man-made islands in the South China Sea since 2014. $5 trillion of trade pass through these waters each year. Vietnam, Malaysia, the Philippines, Brunei, and Taiwan have all challenged Chinese claims in the region. The U.S. Navy sent warships near the islands 3 times in 2016. Last year, an international tribunal rejected many of China's claims to the islands. The U.S. Navy has not sailed near these contested islands since October. A recent New York Times story questioned whether the Trump administration had given up on these operations while trying to work with China on the North Korea problem. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says China has been helpful, threatening North Korea with sanctions if it didn't change its behavior.
They confirmed to us that they had requested the regime conduct no further nuclear test.
In Washington, the chief of naval operations was questioned about today's operation.
I'm still curious about the timing. Why now?
I would suppose that there's an implicit dimension to your question that these are somehow confrontational or something like that, and I would say that they're exactly the opposite.
A U.S. official tells me the U.S. warship performed 3 man-overboard drills within 6 nautical miles of shore, showing the Chinese they were not just passing through. Bret.
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. Up next on this first foreign trip, first chance to share a little of the spotlight. Tonight, reporter Kitty Logan on the First Lady going public.
While the president met with EU leaders in Belgium today, the First Lady had some business of her own. Melania Trump took time out to visit children in a Brussels hospital. She seemed at ease joining kids in making paper flowers, even producing one herself. She came bearing gifts for the kids and was presented with a handmade bouquet in return. Before she left, she posed for a selfie with a new fan. It was Melania's 3rd solo visit to a children's hospital on this foreign tour. In Italy, she also spent time at a clinic at the Vatican, this time doing drawings with sick kids from 15 different countries.
Hospitals and children's issues are a very safe place for Melania Trump to be. She can do good, and she can get little criticism for trying to help out those causes.
Melania was at her husband's side for his meeting with Pope Francis. The black lace veil she wore sparked a debate on social media. The First Lady had worn no head covering in Saudi Arabia. Her spokeswoman said that Melania, herself a Catholic, was simply following Vatican protocol to meet the Pope. The Saudi government had not made a request for her to cover her hair. Though it was this moment which drew the most public comment. As Melania arrived in Israel, she was caught on camera, apparently slapping away the president's hand. She also appeared to again refuse to take his hand when arriving in Rome.
We've seen them hold hands more than we've seen them not hold hands or brush away. I think we're making a little bit too much of a simple gesture.
On a visit to the Sistine Chapel, Melania was hand in hand with her husband as the pair admired the famous chapel painted by Michelangelo. And she'll be returning to Italy to end the tour as the president meets G7 leaders in Sicily. Until this trip, Melania Trump has kept a fairly low profile during the early days of her husband's presidency. She seems now ready to embrace the role of First Lady in her own style. Bret?
Kitty, thank you. The Dow was up here in the U.S. 70.5 today. The S&P 500 climbed nearly 11. The Nasdaq rose 42. Democrats up on Capitol Hill are heaping criticism on the House health care reform bill after yesterday's financial scoring by the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. But many Republicans are sticking with the plan. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel has the latest tonight from Capitol Hill.
What CBO just told us is the reforms that we put in this bill will help lower premiums. And so I'm very encouraged by that.
The Congressional Budget Office analysis says 23 million more people would lose insurance in the next decade with the House Republican health care plan, and the fallout is still being felt. But the CBO says the legislation would cut $119 billion from the deficit by the end of 2026. Top Democrats took the CBO analysis to mean the Republican plan would be a disaster.
Yesterday, the CBO confirmed what we all knew, but they made clear that many Americans with pre-existing conditions would face soaring costs and frightening limits on the care they need.
Today, the White House budget director questioned the ability of the Congressional Budget Office to predict the future.
If you look at the methodology, they assume that folks who are on Medicaid, which is free, will choose to get off Medicaid when the mandate goes away. Now you tell me if that sounds like the real world.
Senate Republicans were already lukewarm to the House bill.
We're writing our own bill in the Senate. I think everybody understands that, and it's a heavy lift. We're starting with a blank sheet of paper, and that's not with any disrespect towards what's happened. It's just the way, the House and Senate are supposed to work.
And Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said yesterday he wasn't sure how they'd get 50 votes at the moment. He's calling on Democrats to help and emphasizing the status quo, Obamacare, is not sustainable.
Democrats have already effectively conceded
effectively conceded that Obamacare has failed. Now the question is, will they work with us to actually fix this mess?
With premiums going up and insurers pulling out of markets, some Democrats admit something must be done.
We just want to sit down and fix the private market. We want to make sure a pre-existing condition is taken care of, and the people don't have to worry, are they going to get it? We don't want seniors 60 to 64 years of age paying 5 times what a younger person just because of their age.
Senate Republican staffers are expected to sit down over Memorial Day recess to craft language for a bill. I'm told they don't have a final agreement yet, but will put some ideas together for senators to work on when they get back. Bret?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thank you. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, forecasts 5 to 9 hurricanes this summer. It says 2 to 4 of them could be major. The 6-month Atlantic hurricane season starts June 1st. Last weekend, federal officials seized almost 14,000 pounds of marijuana hidden in a tractor trailer with a load of bell peppers in southern Arizona. Officials put the worth of that haul at about $7 million. Which brings us to tonight's story from national correspondent William LaJeunesse, who tells us that while illegal immigration may be down, smuggling at the border is way up.
On a typical day a few months ago, you would see 3, 4, 5 rafts full of people coming across. Now, as you can see, there's not very much going on.
But a few miles away, smugglers are busy, not moving people, but drugs. In Texas, smugglers float fully loaded trucks filled with marijuana across the Rio Grande. This one got turned back by the Border Patrol, forcing the driver to ditch it in the river. Fellow smugglers tried to swim the pot back to Mexico. And when we were there, it happened again.
So moments ago, this pickup was on the U.S. side filled with marijuana. Border Patrol gave chase. They turned around, dumped it in the Rio Grande. We got about half the marijuana. The other half went back to Mexico on a raft.
Most pot is backpacked over the border. By contrast, 81% of hard drugs cross at the ports of entry in cars.
We've seen narcotics come in shaped like carrots, mangoes, lime, watermelon, so they'll take advantage of whatever's there.
Agent's best defense walks on 4 legs, not 2.
Really, it doesn't really matter. They train in all and anything, marijuana, cocaine, heroin.
American drug users get about 95% of their heroin, coke, and meth from Mexico. Hidden in tires, bumpers, and buckets. Here in the Rio Grande Valley, seizures more than doubled from last year.
They need to make their profit somewhere, so now they're trying with narcotics.
Stopping drugs is harder than stopping people. Smugglers do tunnel under the border, but existing fences force smugglers to move their high-value hard drugs through ports of entry and checkpoints. In 1 week, agents here seized $12 million in liquid meth, an effort undermined by users.
Again, there's a problem on the United States side that there is a demand for these drugs, and we have to recognize that.
While the president's budget proposal does add more manpower, roads, and fencing, the cartels have replaced their radios with encrypted phones, their trucks with drug delivery drones, and sources say today the United States seizes less than 50% of all illegal narcotics crossing the border. Bret?
William, thank you. President Trump gets tough.
23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States. And many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years and not paying in those past years. Over the last 8 years, the United States spent more on defense than all other NATO countries combined. And I never asked once what the new NATO headquarters cost. I refused to do that. But it is beautiful.
Well, it cost roughly $1.3 billion, they say, maybe up to 1.6. As you take a look at the map of NATO countries, the red countries are 0 to 1% of their GDP paid, yellow countries 1 to 2%, and the green countries 2% or above. 2% or above is what they pledged to pay, and this has been an ongoing battle with NATO. In fact, here's former Defense Secretary Bob Gates.
The blunt reality is that there will be dwindling appetite and patience in the United States Congress and in the American body politic writ large to expend increasingly precious funds on behalf of nations that are apparently unwilling to devote the necessary resources or make the necessary changes to be serious and capable partners in their own defense. Ultimately, nations must be responsible for their fair share of the common defense.
Sounds familiar. Let's bring in our panel. Jonah Goldberg, senior editor at National Review. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio. Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. And Mercedes Schlapp, columnist with the Washington Times. Mara, what about today's message? We look at the faces of those European leaders. They seemed to be snickering or appalled, or one of the two.
Well, they didn't like it. I think that's fair to say. He scolded them. It was a public scolding. And what's interesting about it is, obviously, he's not the first person who's done this. You just heard Gates say the same thing. Obama complained about free riders. He's totally within his rights. On the other hand, he was a little bit misleading when he said they owe the American taxpayers. By that definition, they also own the Polish taxpayers, the Greek taxpayers, and the British taxpayers, and the Estonian taxpayers, because those are the other countries that are paying their share.
Yeah, and I think he was saying that the American taxpayer has been paying up for all these years, and there are countries who haven't paid for many years.
That's right, but it's not a protection right. They don't pay us to protect them. They spend a certain amount on defense so that they can all contribute to the common defense. On that one, he's within his rights. I think that what the Europeans would have liked to hear, in addition to that, because they knew about that, was a more ringing defense of Article 5, which is an attack on one is an attack on all. He didn't mention it, but he didn't give them what they were hoping for.
Didn't talk a lot about Russia. This is the one part getting tough. Take a listen.
We must be tough, we must be strong, and we must be vigilant. The NATO of the future must include a great focus on terrorism and immigration, as well as threats from Russia and on NATO's eastern and southern borders.
So that's what these NATO countries wanted to hear. They didn't really want to get slapped around.
Of course not. I think that it's in President Trump's right to be frustrated with these NATO members. I mean, when you think about that, you look at Germany, Canada, France, they're paying less than 2%. And guess what? Also, there's no IRS for NATO, right? There's no one basically tracking this defense spending or basically saying you're obliged to pay, you need to pay now. So his frustration is correct. And I think that there is a sense that, yes, they wanted to hear more because on the sense of Russia and the possibility of attacks. That's also very important, obviously, to those eastern countries that are bordering Russia. But, I think the president has his right to do this. I think President Obama said it in a different tone, basically saying that he was chipping, that, these countries should chip away at paying for this defense of NATO. But, at this point, I think it was in his right to go ahead and be forceful with the NATO members.
For an American domestic political audience, this is a very, very popular argument for him to make, and it's very well grounded. But I don't think it's going to work until he starts pulling troops out, because that's the last thing that these NATO people want. He's not going to pry the money loose from them that he wants to by his rhetoric. He can only do so by his words.
He has, the needle has moved, though, Jonas. Some of these countries have stepped up there, and that is something that previous presidents haven't been able to do, despite talking about it a lot.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump was this is one of these areas where his bluntness is actually long overdue and welcome, because we've been trying to deliver this message very, politely through, over clever cheese in fancy hotel meeting rooms, and it's never really worked. And now he's up there, and he's like a bull in a china shop, and he says, "You guys gotta pony up." And I think it's worth doing, because look, I'm a big supporter of NATO, but we've basically been subsidizing Western Europe's welfare states for about 30 years, and that's been one of the causes of Europe's problems. And they need to sort of man up, to use a phrase. I do worry, in one sense, though, that Donald Trump is not popular in Europe, and just as we've seen in America, Obamacare become more popular under Trump, and we've seen immigration and free trade become more popular under Trump. You could see there being a backlash against doing what Trump wants to do in Europe. Fortunately, European countries aren't all that democratic, and their elites understand that they need us, and maybe this will actually work.
In the meantime, he did get an earful from the British Prime Minister, Theresa May.
We have a special relationship with the USA. It is our deepest defense and security partnership that we have. Of course, that partnership is built on trust, and part of that trust is knowing that intelligence can be shared confidently. And I will be making clear to President Trump today that intelligence that is shared between law enforcement agencies must remain secure.
Soon after that statement, the administration put out something from President Trump. The alleged leaks coming out of the government agencies are deeply troubling. These, by the way, are leaks that went to the New York Times and other agencies. These leaks have been going on for a long time, and my administration will get to the bottom of this. The leaks of sensitive information pose a grave threat to our national security. I'm asking the Department of Justice and other relevant agencies to launch a complete review of this matter, and if appropriate, the culprit should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. In one sense, Mara, this is lining up with what he's concerned about at home, which are leaks.
That's right. And these leaks were a little bit different from the other leaks. They don't seem to be leaks that were meant to undermine Donald Trump or embarrass him or show what kinds of outrageous things he might have said in a private meeting to a world leader. These were leaks with an ongoing current law enforcement investigation in Manchester to try to find the bomber's accomplices. And the name of the bomber was released before British intelligence wanted it to be, and the police in Manchester decided to stop sharing intelligence with the United States. That's quite a breach for, as Theresa May said, the closest intelligence relationship in the world, really.
I don't think this is intelligence. I think it's evidence. And I think the New York Times and the NYPD and whoever's, and we know they're there, and the FBI and whoever's there on the ground is absolutely entitled to discuss it. It's not classified. It's not even protected by any statute of which I'm aware. The British culture and the British system is not to give progress reports during law enforcement. The American culture is to do that.
Yeah, but why shouldn't we do what the Brits want us to do in this case?
As we were talking,
we publish whatever we find out about the truth.
As we were talking, the British put out a statement saying they are resuming intelligence sharing, saying while we do not usually comment on information sharing arrangements, having received fresh assurances, we are now working closely with our key partners around the world, including all those in the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, which includes the U.S. Mercedes.
Right. Well, I think, first of all, these leakers are becoming a disturbing trend that we're seeing in the Trump administration, where you have these leakers who, Maura, you said that it wasn't based specifically on pushing back on President Trump or weakening President Trump.
Like the other leaks, yeah.
Right, but I think it actually does. I think even by putting out this information, giving it to the New York Times, in essence, it really attacks and weakens President Trump and his relationship with our key allies. So I do think that that's a fundamental problem that we have. Obviously, it is key to continue sharing intelligence information with our allies. It is one of the ways that we can stop terrorism. It is one of the ways that we can ensure that we have national security, our secrets kept in line, as opposed to what we're seeing when you do see these leaks come out from the intelligence agencies.
I want to talk about this other topic, which is the NSA and the FISA court and these documents. We've been doing this story over the past 2 days. Really hasn't been picked up anyplace else. It was first covered by Circa News, in which the FISA court is harshly rebuking the Obama administration for essentially illegal searches on thousands of Americans. And there's not a lot of outrage about this.
It's astounding that there's not a lot of outrage. It's astounding that you have covered it more than the networks combined. And I don't understand that. But I do understand that the FISA court has had an end run around it by NSA, that NSA has been doing massive amount of spying, surveilling, capturing every keystroke on every iPhone and every desktop and every phone call and all fiber optic cable in the United States that they can without telling the FISA court about it. And the vast majority of it involving tens of millions of Americans, maybe even hundreds of millions of Americans, is a profound violation of the Fourth Amendment. Now, for the FISA court to rebuke NSA is almost a joke. There's no sting to the rebuke. There's no consequence to the government. And as horrific as this has been under Barack Obama, it started in 2005 under George W. Bush, and I'm sorry to tell you, it continues even up to the present moment under President Donald Trump.
John.
Yeah, I mean, I have some disagreements with Judge Napolitano, but one of the things I like about Judge Napolitano is he's actually consistent. He is a civil libertarian, and he doesn't like this stuff under Republicans and under Democrats. I keep saying these days, you know, if hypocrisy were helium, everyone would have funny voices, and some people would just float away. If this had happened under George W. Bush, the New York Times would be out there, the editors would be pouring jerry cans of gasoline over themselves, setting themselves on fire in protest. The ACLU would be rioting. At the same time, some of my friends on the right who aren't as civil libertarian would be saying, look, this is an unfortunate overreach, but you know, this is an important program. It's necessary to keep us safe. And instead, there's a lot more outrage on the right than there normally would be. I think the program is defensible. I think basically giving the middle finger to the FISA court is outrageous, and the way they basically slow walked this for years is outrageous. And if you want to reauthorize the 702 program, you better hold some people accountable, because otherwise you play right into Judge Napolitano's hands and Rand Paul's hands and say this is a program run amok.
But Mara, this tracks with the same, you know, the investigation about unmasking and the politics surrounding this FBI investigation. It's different in its scope, but it tracks at the same time.
We have a big endemic systemic problem with privacy and leaks and information that shouldn't be shared. And Congress is going to have to do something about it. It's one thing, Donald Trump can track down these leakers and try to prosecute them. He can try. But Congress is going to have to do something about it, because this has been going on for a very long time. And even after Congress wanted it stopped, remember? We thought this program was finished.
But this brings up the issue of Susan Rice, that, you know, there's more questions that need to be answered than we know, and we're not going to find out. Obviously, she was part of the unmasking of many of these Trump campaign officials. It is problematic. They don't have an oversight structure in place, and there is concern, I think, for Americans out there, their issue of getting tapped or getting their information.
To the CBO score, because you know you were waiting to make your decision about healthcare until you saw the bill and it just came out. And what you thought
we'll talk to you about that later.
Yeah, but there's not going to be time. I'm just curious if you had to act
speak
right
with
now.
Shane, please.
But you don't.
Sick and tired of you guys. The last guy that came in here, you did the same thing. Get the hell out of here. Get the hell out of here. The last guy did the same thing. You were the Guardian?
Yes, and you just broke my glasses.
The last guy did the same damn thing.
You just body slammed me and broke my glasses.
Get the hell out of here.
I was looking right at the two men. At that point, that's when Gianforte put both hands on either side of his neck, grabbed him, grabbed Jacobs, threw him to the ground against this wall on the ground, got on top of him, not really straddling, but just kind of over him, punched him about 2 or 3 times.
Alicia Acuna and her crew were doing a story for the show. Actually, we were going to air it today, and that's when this altercation happened. Police charged Gianforte, the Republican candidate for Congress there in Montana, with misdemeanor assault today. He's running against Democrat Rob Quist. The election is today, and we will get reaction and the results tonight. Mercedes.
At least we're not living during the time of Hamilton and Burr in the duel, because that would have been very problematic. But, you know, we know, I've worked in plenty of campaigns. Tensions are high, day of the election. All you need to say is, I'm sorry, what I did was wrong. And I just find it just so disappointing that Gianforte has not come out and apologized.
Jonah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, first of all, if it was okay for politicians to beat up pushy, nerdy, left-wing journalists, the ERs would be running 24/7. And I share exactly with Mercedes. He just should come out and say, you know, I made a mistake, I lost my temper. What I find really appalling is how many Republicans on the right just can't say, I condemn this behavior, this is not appropriate. People coming out with like excuses about how he had it coming and all of this kind of stuff. It's nonsense. Yeah. Just condemn it, move on. It doesn't have to be the end of the world.
Here is Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi today on this issue.
Should the gentleman apologize? Yeah, I think he should apologize. I know he has his own version, and I'm sure he's going to have more to say, but there's no call for this, no matter what, under any circumstance.
Donald Trump's his model, and we've really got to say, come on, behave. Behave. That was outrageous.
Mara.
Look, he lost the endorsements of several Montana newspapers. They yanked him. He's been charged with misdemeanor assault, and the senator, Daines, is asking him to apologize. Paul Ryan is asking him to apologize. Why isn't he apologizing? This is incredible to me, unless he feels like he's going to win anyway, which he very well might. Half the vote was already in.
Well, let's look at that.
Mail-in ballots.
The early voting, 698 1,000 registered to vote, 352,000 absentee ballots mailed out, 226,000 already returned.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, Mara, he could win.
Absolutely. First of all, he was favored to win anyway. It's a Republican state, but and most of the vote is in. But to me, this is incredible. Now, we have heard about CBO scores causing angst on Capitol Hill, but never violence.
What was your tweet yesterday? Something about Montana. You know, you can't talk about the OMB.
The fun fact is that in the Dakotas, you can say